Howdy, folks. It's Mr. Newfer here. Today, I want to walk you through some of the basics of HTML and maybe a little bit of CSS. These are two languages that are very, very, very popular in web development. HTML being basically the universal standard for creating any website. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, it's just HTML. In class, I'm running my students through our web design unit. It's a pretty short unit we do before game development, and we also do it before we get into our Lego EV3 robots. I think it's important to talk about HTML first because it's a markup language. It makes it a lot easier to work on and to write out than actual, like a real coding language, like maybe Python or JavaScript or something like that. So I'm going to just walk through the basics of this. That way I could show this to my students. Or if you want to learn a little bit more about HTML, just some basic ideas, you can pick that up here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I have right here a very basic setup for a HTML document. You'll see at the top it declares the variable or declares the type of document. So it says this is an HTML document. And then it starts and ends with HTML. And inside this are what we call children. So this is the whole HTML tag, if I could highlight both of them. So line 2 and 12. And everything between it is going to make up the two different components. So the first component is the head. And in our head, we don't actually get too much material that we're going to see. In fact, if you add a title like this, this will only show up as a browser title, as in like the title of the tab. However, everything that we can see goes in the body. So if we want to make any changes or visual changes to this, we want to change it here. We could put things like metadata and other formatting stuff in the head, but it's more common to put things in the body, especially things that are going to change how it looks. So another important thing about this being a markup language, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And hypertext is basically just text that you find on the internet. It's text that can be linked to, so it's hypertext and it's like a hyperlink. They kind of work together. We'll talk a little bit more about hyperlinks here in a second. All right, a good way to talk about HTML is to talk about it using tags. So all of these blue arrow to arrow things, so we have a less than sign and a greater than sign, and inside of it is our tag. So I'm just going to refer to these as arrows from now on, left arrow and right arrow, if I need to refer to them. And you'll notice all of these have two parts. So there's an opening tag up here. Let's look at line 8 here as an example. This is our opening tag. It has arrow, H1, arrow. And then inside it just says this is a heading. This is a very simple example that I got from W3 HTML tutorial. A very awesome resource if you want to learn HTML or many other coding languages. And then it starts with H1 and it ends with a closing tag. This says arrow slash H1. This tells your program that everything between it is meant to be a level 1 header, H1. You can do H1 through 6, and each one is basically just a smaller font. So that way, if you were to do a big, bulky document, actually, let's look at this as an example. This is something I created with the help of ChatGPT to help describe this a little bit better. You'll see in here, if I scroll down, we have header 1s here and header 3s here. So I'm going to run this real quick. And I want you to see the difference between what says HTML tags and elements and what says heading tags. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control F5 and run this. So now when this is running, this is a header 1 and this is a header 2 right here. Header 3. That's a header 3 level. So the main difference is the font size. If you make anything a heading, this is going to be bolded. I'm going to show you this in a second, but this is all created with the paragraph tag. So if I exit this and I scroll down a little bit, this is in this size. So the paragraph tag is just basic text. All right, let's go back to our original document. I'm doing this in Visual Studio Code. I think it's one of the better code editors to get started with, especially if you're not going to be going into a specific language, but you want the freedom to do multiples. And if you're going to be writing in HTML, this is a great one because you can make separate files up here for CSS and JavaScript, which are very commonly used with HTML. Okay, so now that we have a good idea of our editor, of our document type, what HTML is, we might as well talk about what it does. So I mentioned that it's a markup language and not a coding language. What that really means is it's a way to take all of our white text on here. So this is the text that shows up on the page or in the tab, on the page or in the tab if it's in the title. If I were to just throw this on a website, it would look something like this. Page title. This is a heading. This is a paragraph. This is not very easy to read. It's just kind of a mess of words with different capitalizations and spelling errors. Not bad. But that's not helpful. If you pull up a big blog and it's just one big chunk of text, nobody's going to want to read it. It's kind of a pain in the butt. It's not formatted. The punctuation's wrong. So what we could do here, let me get rid of that. What we could do here is add tags. And these tags are going to help us format where everything goes. We can put stuff in the title. We can go ahead and put stuff here. And if we're looking at a crazier example like this, we can actually add divisions into our code. So this is a different type of tag called a div. And it's basically a divider. So when I run this again, in each divider, you can see that I have this one will be heading tags, this divider will be the paragraph tag, and this will talk about the style tag. So if I run it, you can see our divider here is this big old box. Now, to create a box like this, I have to use CSS. So let's look at CSS and how that integrates. Basically, anytime you see a style tag, we're telling the document to add CSS into it. And you can see CSS looks a little bit different. So in here, we're defining, hey, in the body of our HTML, so that would be this area. In our simple example, it's a little bit easier to look at this one. We're telling the body that it should be the Arial font, sans serif. It should have no margin, and it should have no padding around it. So these would be in pixels, but we don't have anything there. But we could see in a container, we'd have 20 pixels. We can also change the colors of things. So if I go ahead and make this a bright red, and I run that, we're going to see that now our H1 is bright red. We use CSS to do this because it says heading 1 right here, and the color should be this. And then we can look at each of our boxes. So we can choose a background color for our boxes and a border for it. And in VS Code, we have a nice little option to change the colors here using the RGB system, red, green, and blue, and we can change the mix of it. You can tell it's RGB because it has RGB up here. So then you see that there's a border radius of 5 pixels. It has 20 pixels around it to pad it, and a margin bottom. So let's take a deeper look at this one over here. So we go Control F5, and we have our box here. This border is 2 pixels. It's 20 pixels away from everything around it, and it's got a little bit of a margin there. Okay, so let's do a little bit of writing in HTML. So if I want to spice this up a little bit, so I'll go ahead and run this. Oops. Let me save it first. We'll just call it Control S. Let me put it in my Y drive. We'll just call this test. So you got to save it first if you want to run it. Now, if I go ahead and run this in Chrome, it's going to look very, very basic and very, very simple. Now, we can use some CSS to spice it up a little bit, make it look a little bit better. In order to do this, we're going to use a style tag. Just like we did in our other example, we're going to go ahead and add in one of these. However, we're not setting up a style for the whole website because this one's not going to be too crazy. It's just a simple example. So we can actually just change the style of this body. We just want to change how it shows up. So to do that, we can actually just modify the body tag. So I'm going to come here, and I'm just going to say our style equals, and VS Code gives us these nice little quotation marks right here around our cursor. And now inside those quotation marks, I'm just going to say background color. CSS itself is a lot closer to a coding language. So we have to write it out more like the syntax that it needs or the order of the words that it needs. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll go through that in a second. Now we'll hit colon, and Visual Studio gives us all of these colors that we can use automatically. We can choose whatever we want. I find myself using aquamarine a lot. I think it's kind of a fun color, but it's not too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to aquamarine, and you see we get our nice little red, green, blue filter in here so we could change the color on it if we wanted to. We could also make it more transparent if we wanted to as well. But we're not going to mess with that too much now. And you can see that changed it to an RGB value instead of the aquamarine that we had at first, which is no problem. Alrighty, so I still have my arrows on both sides because it's a tag, and I still have the closing tag down here. So let's go ahead and run this one now. I'm going to go Control S to save it, and I'm going to go Control F5, bring this up. Hey, that looks a little bit better now, yeah. So we have a nice little background color here made completely with our CSS styling. So we'll go ahead and exit out of that one. And now we can come in here and we are actually going to do one more. So I mentioned this is a hypertext markup language. The hypertext is any text you can find on the internet. The reason this is important is because the internet, otherwise known as the World Wide Web, is basically like a web of all of the computers connected to it. HTML itself was actually created in 1985, shortly after the invention of the World Wide Web. So it was created specifically to be able to get text to and from other computers. We can do that using a hyperlink. So to create a hyperlink, we need to create a new tag. So we're going to go ahead and make an arrow, and then we're just going to hit A. A stands for anchor, and we're basically using that as an anchor to where we're going to go with this hyperlink. So we need to do href. This is, I believe it stands for hyperlink reference or hyperreference. And we can use this to add our URL. So now I'm just going to say equals, and we'll automatically get our quotation marks there. And I'm going to add a URL. I'm just going to add the Scratch URL because we use Scratch all the time in class. I think it's a great example to go with. So we need to use the full URL. If I were to go to Scratch's website right now, it would just say scratch.mit.edu. That's not a full URL because most URLs start with HTTP or HTTPS if it's secure, which, by the way, just an internet safety thing. Do not ever give your information to a website that just says HTTP unless you're sure you can trust it. So let's go ahead and add our link in here. HTTPS : and then we'll just add in the URL, scratch.mit.edu. Then we're going to close up this tag, and you'll see we get a closing tag on the other side right here automatically because Visual Studio is pretty good at this. And now we just need to add what our link is going to look like. So this will be the actual thing that we click on, and I'm going to just say Scratch link. Easy peasy. Now I'm going to Control S to save and Control F5 to show it. And you'll see here, it has everything else that we already had on here, a nice little background color, but it also includes a Scratch link right in there. So I'm going to go ahead and click it, and it's going to take us right to Scratch, and we can, go about our business on Scratch. All right, there's one more thing I want to show. HTML can do a bunch of stuff, especially when it's paired with CSS and JavaScript, but we can also use HTML for basic animation, specifically with the marquee tag. I think this one's really fun. I love showing it to students because we've just finished up our animation unit, so they have a pretty good understanding of what that is and how it works, and they always seem to be fascinated by how easy it is to make an animation here. So we're going to use our marquee tag, so we'll spell out marquee, and as soon as I close this tag, it's going to go ahead and put in the closing tag on this side too. So now we could just type whatever we want, and I'll just say this line scrolls. Actually, let's say this line is a marquee. I'm just going to do that to keep it in line with the rest of my website. Control S and Control F5. And now we have everything on here, but you'll see over here, our little marquee line scrolls across. So this is kind of neat. You can get more detailed with it and go ahead and change like the way it moves and things like that. You can marquee in a bigger font or whatever you'd like to do to it. But for now, this is a fine example. All right, there's one last thing I want to show you. So we did this CSS line inside the body tag in order to give us a background color. We can add this into any tag that we have, but we don't have to do just the background color. We can either choose to change the background color of a line, so we'll do that to H1. So we'll say style equals background color, and we'll make this one, let's give it a nice dark crimson. Doesn't seem too dark, but it should work out. And in this one, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're going to still add our style to this one. We'll say style equals, but instead of a background color, we want to change the color of this text right here. So to do that, it's pretty simple. All we got to do is type color. And then when we hit our colon, if we typed everything out correctly, we should have the opportunity to change the color here. So I know my background is aquamarine, so I want to choose something that's going to stand out nice and dark on that. So aquamarine would probably work well with indigo. So let's go ahead and add that, and we have our RGB selector here. All right, so let's go Control S, and let's run this one more time so we can see what we've done here. Basically, we've just added some CSS, some style to our tags. And it's nice because we can see right here in our style tag that this contains CSS styling declarations. All right, Control S, Control F5 to run it. And now you'll see here, we change this color of the text itself. It's actually kind of hard to see here. It looks kind of black, but this is actually a dark purple. And here we chose to change the background color. And you can see it changes the background color of this entire line, unless we tell it not to do that. But I'm trying to keep this pretty basic right now. With that, we have a pretty good understanding of how HTML works. Remember, we can also do our style inside of the head if we want to change something for the entire document. We can set up what we want containers to look like. We can set up what we want boxes to look like. And we can also set up how we want text to look just automatically. So that's basically how it goes. And inside, we can also add coding. Quite often, you'll see a tag that says script, and that's specifically for JavaScript when you want to run actual code. And you'll use code for things like buttons, for some types of animation. A lot of times, if you're on a website, if you like click on a picture, it'll get bigger. All of that is accomplished with JavaScript. JavaScript really gives us the ultimate customizability, but it is also a little bit more difficult than HTML and CSS, but it's still a great starting language if you want to get into coding. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in a comment, or you can call, or you can email me in. So with that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope this was very informational.